We have one loving God, but we have so many different ways, so many different journeys toward Him. And our special guest today, Kevin Nicholson, a successful businessman. Well, part of his faith story involves him serving our country in a heroic fashion. And we're delighted to have him with us on My Faith with Homer and Pip. We wish you a happy and blessed new year wherever you are with the Homer, whose idea it was, and our fine producer, Brent Young. I'm Tommy Pippins. And so, as always, Mr. True, kick it off with Kevin Nicholson, please.
I love to because I don't know anything, just that you set it up, which means I am going to be amazed because I always end. So yes, it's as just as Tommy stated, it's about everyone's faith, the similarity, yet the differences. So take it away wherever you want to start.
Is it kick to me? Is it my turn to kick off?
This is your show. This is all you.
Well, Homer and Pip, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. And thanks for doing this. I think it's an important thing to do, especially at this point in history, to have people talk about their faith and how important it is. And I think recent events kind of lay that out for everybody. That there's, I think, I'll talk about this as I tell my story. I think there is a crisis of faith in our nation. And many people have lost their way, and they're trying to fill that void with things that never can. And that's part of the yearning and part of the stress and the anxiety, I think, that we're seeing in so many people. It's not easily solved, but I mean, again, I think that part of what I see comes from my story. And so to share that, I was born in Milwaukee, and I grew up predominantly in southeastern Wisconsin. We, as a family, moved around a bit when I was a kid. I moved to Europe when I was young. I lived in Holland for a few years. We came back home to the Milwaukee area, eventually moved out to Seattle for a couple of years, and then came back, settled in Mequon, graduated from Homestead. And throughout my youth, I grew up in a family where the very concept of having faith in God, and I'm talking here about my nuclear family, and my goal is not to disparage people, but I will say that I grew up with a very vitriolic message when it came to faith. The concept of faith was derided. The concept of belief in God was roundly mocked. Now, I had grandparents who were, on one hand, devout Catholics, and on the other, devout Lutherans. And my larger family, aunts, uncles, cousins, are all believers, and all grew up with faith in their lives. So the pocket in which I grew up in was I would describe, certainly lacked faith, but also tended to be a very vitriolic, very difficult place. Faith, forgiveness, the idea of grace was typically lacking. And as I grew up as a young person, I didn't necessarily connect all of that to the idea that, you know, that it was very much connected to a lack of faith in our household and our home. And it was difficult at times. And I don't think I fully conceptualized all this until I got to be a young man. I went to college. I met my wife, then girlfriend, now wife, who was grew up in a slightly different circumstance. She was the daughter of a Pentecostal minister. So to say that her faith story is slightly different, I think is a fair case to make. But, you know, she showed, I think, a lot of grace as she was dealing with this young man who had such a different experience than she did. And I did, made many stupid and just very ignorant comments about the concept of belief in God, of faith, of just understanding how important it is to have faith in your life. I didn't understand those things. I just didn't get it. I was not only not exposed to it, but I was told that you were, in essence, a fool to believe. So as I grew up, and as I was certainly exposed to my wife and her experience, and I think that what she did a good job of when we were young people was not immediately pressing me to change my worldview and to immediately, you know, change everything that I'd heard as a young person. But I think she did a good job of just asking questions, making sure I was thinking like a mature adult, that I was actually starting to question assumptions that had been given to me as a young person. And then I joined, I left college. I had an interesting path. I left college for a little while. I went out to Wyoming. I worked as a cowboy. I'd been involved in politics as a young person, and I wanted to get away from all that because a lot of what I saw was not particularly appealing. And my path actually led me to go off to Wyoming for a while, work as a cowboy, come back, finish school, and then eventually join the Marine Corps. And then I served from 2004 to '09. And part of that process, exposed me to just a lot of different walks of life, a lot of people in very different places. And I mean, literally from politicos in Washington, D.C., to I ran a newspaper for a while before I actually went out to work as a cowboy. I worked as a cowboy ranchers on the cusp of America's frontier, such that we still have a frontier in this country, to locals in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I think when you see people in all these different places struggling with very different challenges, you see people that could not get past those challenges if they did not have faith in their life, that they did not have something more. I think I was exposed through the walk that I took to people who understood redemption, who did understand forgiveness, who understood, again, some element of grace in their life in a way that, again, I just didn't see as I grew up as a young person. And I'll tell you, if you want to have your worldview tested, there's no better place to do it than in combat, where you will see things happen that you really can't explain simply through logic, in terms of seeing good people lost through no fault of their own. And I don't just mean service members, I mean regular people who are exposed to the horror of war and combat. And you come to understand there's something larger at play here. And it makes you test assumptions and think and understand that there's a plan beyond your own plan, and that things are in place that God understands that you simply don't. And for me, and I think the way I was raised was, you have to aggressively try to correct every wrong, make no mistakes. It's on you to fix everything. Some amount of what I learned through my life was you really can't do all that. There is a plan in place that you cannot just simply control. And that for me, I think, was very eye-opening. And I understand this is not maybe the faith story that everybody else has, in the way that, and I think everybody's faith story is frankly very unique. But for me, it was being confronted repeatedly with seismic changes in environment, seismic changes in culture, and then seeing certain constants across those things, right? That, again, the things that we can't control. Seeing everybody from the rancher in Wyoming to the local national in Afghanistan that could display maybe an understanding that their life was not simply in their own hands. And that was important for me to see that across such a wide and broad canvas.
You're exposed to all these things.
What's that?
I said, you're exposed to all these things. When did you think, no, I still don't buy it? Or there's a moment where you bought it, he touched you, or there's a moment when first you became open to the thought. I'm just curious, given all these things you mentioned, when you bought it, when you said yes, because your experiences are so wide, as you just told us. When was that time?
I don't know that I can say there ever is just one moment in my life. And I know that's not necessarily consistent with everybody's faith story. For me, it's a gradual awakening of my life, my soul, my understanding, and just seeing again and coming to accept that. And again, this is going to sound maybe a bit analytical, but just wake up one day and realize this did not all come from nothing. And you can be a physicist, you can be a scientist, you can be a chemist, you can understand so much of the building blocks of what has been created. And that's great. And I know many of those people and I work with them. But you're understanding building blocks within a grander design, which was put in place by God. And I think for me, it was not just one moment, but it was a continual testing of assumptions and looking and realizing that, of course, this didn't all simply happen, didn't all simply come from nothing. These seismic events that have shaped us as a people were put in place by a plan which is well beyond us. And so I understand, like, for many people, there is a moment. And I completely respect that. I think for me, it was a continual testing. And somewhere in that space, as I became a young man and in my early 20s and had these very challenging experiences, I came to accept that I'm not the controller of my own fate. I can do my part, to be sure, and I've been given my own self-will and my capability by God to go out and do the right thing. But at the end of the day, I can't control everything. God has a plan. I can do my part, and I should do that part correctly as best that I can. So,
So there's a God, but then we all decide who or what that God is. A incredibly kind God, an incredibly all the different aspects about him, which again differs from person to person a little bit based on their faith. So there's a God. It explains things that happen, but who is that God? What is that God? Where did you go with that?
well, one of the important things I think I had to realize is that God has given us free will. Yes, he sent us his son, and he's done a lot to explain how we should live our lives. But at the end of the day, humans have been given free will. And that is so much an important part of this my awakening, but also too, I think an important part of what I try to talk to people about within the realm of politics or what I do with our nonprofit as well. It's the idea that at the end of the day, we do have control, and it's very clear. And, I think many of the people that struggle with the concept of faith or who push back on the belief in God often come back in the very simplistic response of, well, how could all these terrible things happen if there's a God? If there's a God, he should be taking care of every single instance of negativity that occurs. And look, as someone that grew up without faith in my life, certainly that was a question that I would have asked when I was a young person. But it is that idea of you yourself have your own self-will, and God has given that to us. And at the end of the day, there's an expectation, there has to be an expectation amongst humanity that we're going to constantly strive to do the right thing. That God, again, has a larger plan, but at the end of the day, my own, again, faith story and my awakening tells me that, I can't understand that full plan. And that certainly has been true throughout my life and things that I've been exposed to. But at the end of the day, I have to do my part on this earth as best I can to try and do the right thing. And that's been a big part of whatever I've done politically and running for the United States Senate. It's a big part of my concern as I look at our nation and the state that it's in right now. And that so many people, I think, by not accepting the role that God plays in their life and the fact there are certain things that they can't control, have so much turned to human institutions, to government, to political figures, and so on, hoping that those things can be solved here on earth and perfected in whatever their view of perfection is, whether it's politically left or politically right or whatever, but a belief that can all be solved here on earth. And I personally don't think it can. I think we are imperfect, created in God's image, but imperfect, given self-will, and we have to do the best that we can. And so much has shaped my view of humanity is never going to be perfect. We should not strive for that because that's going to be a very disappointing journey. But we have to do everything we can to take care of one another, to do the right thing, and then accept that there's a certain thing beyond us, again, God's plan that we can't fully understand.
What do you think you have done in your life to this point that and can attribute to your relationship to God and your faith that you would not have done it or the way you did it?
I believe my role as a father. I have 3 young children, Connor, Emily, and Kate. And, again, without getting all the details, I don't believe that I am the parent I am. Certainly, again, this is part of God's plan too. Without the influence of my wife, I wouldn't be the parent that I am today, for sure. But again, I think one of the things I try to get across to my children is that there is a right and there is a wrong. There's also redemption. There's also a path back. And I think that for sure I would not be the parent that I am today without God's influence, because I, again, was I think, raised in an environment where once a mistake was made, that was permanent, and that was simply the way it was. And that really does, and it so much echoes so much of what we see in society. It hardens people. It turns them against each other, and it makes you believe that you have crossed a permanent bridge and there's no path back. And I have tried, and I don't think I could do this without God's grace, to not be that way as a parent, but to say that, yeah, sometimes you're going to make a mistake. And no matter what, I will always love you. There will always be redemption in my eyes. There will be a path back. And by offering that to your children from their very youngest days, you create, I think, a mindset in them that's the same, and they can share that with larger society. But again, the path that I've walked, what I've been exposed to, I don't think that, again, if I had not come to my faith the way that I have, I don't think that I would be the parent that I am today. There's again, my fully credit my wife, but that's part of God's plan too, to bring you to people, to bring you to places that open up your eyes in ways that you would never anticipate.
Is the first thing to you that God is a forgiving God, or is the first thing that God is a loving God? What's at the top of the list in your faith?
It's an interesting question. I don't know that you bring up two important things that I don't know that I could separate. And it speaks a bit to what I was just talking about in parenting style. It's hard. Again, growing up a bit of the way I did, the idea and the concept of constant love and universal love, the idea of a God that loves humanity and loves each of us, again, wasn't expressed to me as a young person. And I think one of the things that I've come to understand is that if you do truly love somebody, if you do truly care about them as God loves us, then of course you will forgive them. That does not mean that you will look past all sin. That does not mean that here on earth that we will not have to atone for and then repent, and then also too sometimes bear out the punishment of what we do. That actually must happen in many cases in order to keep society moving forward here on earth. But the idea that we as people of faith have a role to play again in frankly following and emulating God in terms of being able to forgive people, I think is very important. And that I think those two things are very, very much connected. I guess I do view that very personally because, again, whether it was me as a Marine commander, me as a father, me as a person in private life and business, again, the work we do through our nonprofit, you see a lot of people make mistakes in day-to-day life. And the question is not like, how do you excise those people from your life or get past them or get rid of them or anything like it? It's what can you do, first off, to help correct the mistake? Yeah, sometimes that means that there'll be some amount of, I certainly had experiences as a Marine commander, some amount of punishment doled out. But the idea is, how do you help people get to a point where they can redeem themselves? How can you show the grace in your own life that you come to know from God and actually help people along that path to redeem themselves and move forward? So love and forgiveness I view as intrinsically linked in my mind and absolutely important to how we treat each other as well as what we expect and what we feel from God.
How does faith fit in the military? Faith in the leadership position that you had in the Marines? I have no idea and can't even try to figure out how someone like you deals with that, addresses with that, presents that. What's that world?
Sure. I can tell you at least a bit of a funny story, and then I can talk about it more seriously. So as I went in the Marine Corps, I went in as an officer candidate, which means I had finished college. I was going in to become commissioned a second lieutenant, and you head off to officer candidate school for a number of weeks. And it's not a particularly pleasant experience. It's not the worst thing you'll ever go through, but it's not fun either. And they beat you up pretty bad and make your life pretty miserable intentionally. And there's only certain, and part of the experience really, and the Marines are really good at this, is to consistently take you out of your element, to make you extremely uncomfortable, kind of in many ways simulate the experience of what combat will be like. And there are so few times where you have any time to yourself or any time for even like a moment of reflection just to get away from the constant stress and the yelling and so forth. But one of those very few times is actually on Sunday mornings where you are allowed to attend church service. And you know, even those who probably don't attend church service very consistently made a point of attending church service on those Sunday mornings at Officer Candidate School in Quantico. And I can tell you, I remember there was a moment where basically you're in formation and you break ranks, and then you have the opportunity to choose which service you're going to go to, because they have a number of different services depending on people's faith. And watching the sprinting, I was one of them too, sprinting to line up for the service to make sure that you were going to get there, because you had the option to not attend too. Although that just meant more time with your drill instructors, which was not ideal. So, I mean, I do remember watching the excitement to get into church in a way that I think you don't see every single day or every single Sunday anyway. So that's one part of it, certainly. But then as you move forward, certainly in the military, and boy, this has come under attack at various points throughout our nation's history, has a chaplain service in the Marine Corps. Chaplains are sourced through the United States Navy. They are attached to units, and they make themselves very present in people's lives. They find ways into the barracks and into the offices, and certainly they also deploy with us as well too. And they are there to, yes, to minister to people, but also to be there to counsel. And in an environment that can be admittedly extremely harsh, you know, amongst all the military, I mean, the Marines do maintain a very aggressive culture, and for the right reason, to keep people alive in combat and to allow them to accomplish their mission. But it is meaningful to have someone there that can bring God's grace in a moment that you're not expecting it, or can make a point of reaching out to you and has that mission built into their career in the military. And again, I think those that have kind of attacked this concept of having a chaplain service in the United States military, certainly I don't think they've thought critically about how important it is for people to have access to ministry in times of great need, frankly. So at the same moment, we hear so much about combat vets and PTSD and the difficulty and the mental strain that you go under. To also hear people not understand the importance of having chaplains, I think, is a bit ridiculous. Beyond that, getting beyond like the official function, I will say that, you know, you can do everything right in combat. You can handle every little thing right, and still, for reasons that, again, God's plan are so far beyond your control, horrible things can happen to people that you care about deeply and love. And I know officers who I consider to be amongst the best of the best, who had things happen to them in combat and had things happen to their soldiers, sailors, Marine, and airmen, that they made every reasonable, every conceivable choice and decision to put their people in the right place to be able to achieve the mission and then to come home to their families. And yet, because of events that were beyond their control, they lost people underneath them. And I know officers themselves that I served with who lost their lives as well too, who I know knew their job, knew what to do, understood everything. These are good people. They had beautiful families. They had a path forward in life that did not involve, in their mind, dying for our freedom. I think that's one thing I try to, when I speak ever on Memorial Day or any event, frankly, that touches on those who've lost their lives in service to our country, to point out that we have this kind of moment where we think, well, that was their destiny, right? Like it happened. But you need to put yourself in their shoes, right? And understand that they had every intent of coming home to their families, continuing their lives, pushing on and pushing forward. And that, for reasons that you and I can't fully understand, was not God's plan. It can be enraging. It can be extremely difficult to process. And I think at the end of the day, that is part of what caused me, again, in this idea that there probably isn't no single moment in my life, but just to come to understand all the things that I cannot control and all the things I cannot understand. I can't understand the concept that space continues on forever. That doesn't make sense to me logically. It's just, and I can talk to physicists and they don't understand it either. They might spend their entire life trying to explain that, but it makes no sense. And it really doesn't. And that's a crystallizing moment of like, well, of course, there's things at play that we can't understand. Likewise, too, I can't always understand, like, who comes back from combat and who doesn't. So you have these moments where you have to accept your limitations. And I think, again, if you don't have faith in your life, and if you don't accept there's a plan greater than you, you can lose yourself in trying to explain these things. And again, it's not just about making yourself feel better, for sure, but there is an element of understanding what you have to release and what you don't know, and what is part of God's plan and God's greater design, which man is just simply not intended to know at this stage here on earth.
Tommy, take over.
Kevin, obviously you were touched when you talk about the loss of people you love, brothers and sisters, and you just can't figure that out. Was your faith shaken because of that? Was there a time when you felt like turning away, saying, as Homer, we've talked before, come on, God, why do you allow this to happen? Look what's going on in 2021. Why is this happening? How did you reconcile that with your faith? And did it help you grow closer to this God of love and forgiveness somehow?
Well, I don't want to pretend there's not anger, because that'd be disingenuous to be wrong. And, you know, there are elements of getting mad at the universe, right? Whether that's because the friends of ours don't come back from their mission. It can be because we're staring at the general state of affairs in the world, which, you know, are bad. They're not as bad as they've been in the past, but they're bad. And you can shake your fist and feel anger at a God, again, that would allow these things to happen. And I think, sure, I've had moments like that. I think anybody who's been exposed to kind of extreme situations probably has as well too. Maybe not everybody, but probably many. But on the whole, in my life and in my faith story, I think that it has brought me closer to God. And that's a big part of the story that I've tried to impart today, is that, like, as I have seen these things and come to understand what I can't control and what I don't know and why these things would happen, it has brought me closer to the concept of God has a larger plan. And sometimes things that are truly horrible are a part of that plan. And we can't understand why in this moment. But again, putting yourself in the position of admitting these seismic things you cannot understand helps you understand on a day-to-day basis. You do the best you can with what you got. And you try to comport yourself in a way that's in keeping with decency and, again, redemption, faith, and just being kind to people as best you can. And again, I'm not pretending that we can pull my wife in here. She'll tell you I'm not perfect at this, that's for sure. But you do what you can with what you got. And there are certain things you have to release at a larger level. And I think that, again, as I've become closer to God, it's helped me to accept that. So.
Kevin, my father's been gone many years. He was a Marine Corps sergeant, and he was a great man. He couldn't show his emotions, though, and he was tough. Mm-hmm. He believed that discipline bred respect. I'm sure you can relate to that. So I grew up with this concept that God is a big person up in the sky, a tough cookie you don't want to mess with, who smokes a cigar. You know, as bizarre as that is. But enough about me. I want to pick up on something Homer brought up earlier, especially with everything you went through growing up and then the world that you lived in, life and death. How did you come to a point of surrender and trust that you could look at God as a loving, forgiving Father who wants to embrace Kevin in his arms, especially during the most difficult times?
Well, yeah, I think that, again, my experience, again, accepting what I could and could not control, and knowing, and again, I think conversations with my wife over the years too, and just kind of, again, accepting my faith and understanding think at a deeper level, like, I came to understand on a very personal level that people aren't perfect, and that I have a role to forgive in my own life, and to understand that even if, I can't be perfect on a day-to-day basis, that I have a role in playing in forgiving other people. If I want to be a leader, whether it's in the Marines or civil society or anything like that, it's part of your role to provide answers and to provide a plan and so on and so forth. But it's also part of your job and your role as a leader on earth to be able to forgive people and to help them get their life back on track. And I think as I put myself in that position, it helped me to understand the role that God plays in my own life, which is when I do things wrong, when I am not perfect, when I have to redeem myself, that God still loves me. So again, I don't know if there's any one moment in that, but part of my being stretched and pushed in different directions and exposed to different things, making my own mistakes in life, finding that I could redeem myself and move forward and still maintain relationships with people that I loved, and finding a way to forgive other people, again, taught me that, yes, someone else is doing that in my life. And it's critical that I maintain that relationship with God and I not forget about the role that he plays in forgiving me when I do make mistakes.
I'd like you to have an opportunity, please, to talk about what you're doing now and how faith plays into that. But before I do so, we'll close on that, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
But I always feel like there's something going on in my good buddy Homer's mind as he listens. So, Homer, anything else you want to toss at Kevin Nicholson as he shares his faith story?
Yes, two quick things. One, when do you feel closest to God? When do you feel closest to God?
When I'm with my family. When I'm with my family, surrounded by love. It's not necessarily in a church, and it's not necessarily always in a moment of prayer, but it's when I'm closest to the people that matter the most in my life, and we are surrounded by love, and we have a chance to just be close to each other. Again, I don't want to make too much of it, but I didn't experience that kind of closeness, love, proximity as a young person, as I think my wife and I have managed to create that in our own family. It's when I feel most content. It's when I feel most, I guess, protected under God's grace, and I feel most thankful for everything that he's given me.
And I stole this from Tommy, and that is, if someone comes up to you and admires you, watches you, and says, I like what you do, I like how you act, I like your foundation with your faith in your God, how do I do that? What would you tell them first?
Good question. I would tell them a bit of what I shared earlier, which is that do the best you can with what you've got here on earth in the time that we have. Take from the example God's grace and understand that you have a role to play in helping others, in offering forgiveness, in helping them in their own path as they try to make forward in life. Sometimes that might involve redemption. Sometimes that might simply involve hard work, or whatever the case is. But do the best you can to take from the example of the grace that God shows us and give that back to humanity. And you'll be in a better spot. And it's not just simply about, making ourselves more content and happy, but I think we can all look around the world today and say that if more people were taking that perspective and attitude, and bring God's grace to their fellow people on a daily basis, that we'd be in a much better spot as a society today.
All right, a third one. When in your life have you said, oh, this is just a gift from God? There is no way. God is just the best. Man, this was awesome. There's no way this happens without the loving God.
I am a broken record here. My wife and my kids. I mean, my family is incredibly important to me. I work extremely hard. I don't really have hobbies. We'll talk a bit about my nonprofit in a moment, but if I'm not working or I'm not working on my nonprofit, whatever the case is, I am with my family. And there's a lot of ways my life could have gone where that would not be the case. And I wouldn't have these relationships the way that I do. And I'm incredibly grateful for it. It means a lot to me on a daily basis. And it's all part of the same thing, but I couldn't do the things I do, whether it's, having run for the Senate or running a nonprofit or maintaining the work schedule that I do, if I didn't have their love in my life. I couldn't do it. So they have been a gift from God, and the relationship we have as a family is a gift from God.
I'm done, Tommy. It's all yours.
I was going to say, Kevin, I get that feeling about our loving God when I listen to Homer make a call of a Marquette winning basket. Oh, baby! I mean, hey, it's all part of life, right? Every gift we have, sport, especially in these times, what a gift.
Right.
But to your point, please, of your heart and soul bearing that now, and your faith kind of enveloping, if you will, this nonprofit you're involved in. So tell us about that. And again, please relate it, Kevin, to your faith.
Sure. No, so we didn't talk much about this, but I ran for the United States Senate in 2018. I ended up losing a primary. And as we left that, a number of people that supported me, even people that didn't, came to me and said, okay, that election's done. What do we do going forward to bring forward values that we think are important in order to help, greater society, and kind of just not quit, I guess is the best way to put it. And one of the answers I came back with, well, we can start a group that shares, I think, a series of values that are incredibly important with the state of Wisconsin. And that can be done through a number of different ways. It can be done through physical events where we go out, we bring ideas, policy ideas, share our values with people. And in particular, and this is a big part of No Better Friend's mission, to reach all people, include people. And I'm a conservative politically, but our goal is not just simply to speak to other political conservatives, it's to speak to all people. And so we founded No Better Friend. My wife is involved in the project too. We have an incredible team that are based, that work all across the state. Predominantly, we live in southeastern Wisconsin, but we're operating throughout the state of Wisconsin. We have a multi-part mission, and that mission includes a number of different policy principles that we bring to people. And one is the concept of encouraging policies that encourage market growth and economic growth, because I believe that the ability to grow the pie for all people is incredibly important to a stable and functional society. So we talk about ideas and policies that grow the economy. Likewise, too, we have an incredibly important principle, which is encouraging a culture that embraces and protects innocent life. Part of my experience was I grew up in a home where I was not encouraged to be pro-life, quite the contrary. And what I've come to realize through my having children myself, through seeing innocent life thrown away in combat, is the importance and the role that I play in protecting innocent life. And what we do at No Better Friend is we work directly with people that are on the ground at crisis pregnancy centers. We work with other pro-life groups as well too, to kind of meet people that are at that decision, young families, young mothers who are considering the option of potentially having an abortion. And we try to help and give resources to those on the ground who are reaching people and encouraging them to protect innocent life. We're gonna have some meetings coming up here soon with adoption advocates, which I think it's an incredibly part of, it so much fits in everything we're talking about here today, but literally it's finding a solution here on earth which allows people to protect innocent life and to allow a life endowed by God to continue on with a family that is eager to love that child. And so very much these are practical solutions to real problems and trying to find ways to help people that are in a difficult spot. Likewise, we have a policy principle which is predicated on the idea of a strong national defense. And it's not for the purpose of sending more people to war. It's the idea that a strong national defense actually stops armed conflict before it starts. We have a policy principle, we spend a lot of time on this one, which is education reform and specifically embracing school choice. And we look at our own state from Milwaukee to Green Bay to, you choose the city, Racine, Kenosha. We got a lot of kids who are in substandard schools and who are not surrounded by cultures that encourage them to succeed in life, to take the steps they need to. And then we try to solve their problems later with government policies that simply can't solve their problems. And one of the most important things we can do is very quickly get kids into functioning schools with good cultures. And school choice in the state of Wisconsin allows that to happen, and kids don't have 5 to 8 years for some policymaker to fix their school. They just don't. And so the idea of school choice is, no, it's not the only solution to our education problems in this country, but at the very least, allow the kids that are in some of the toughest spots to immediately get on a trajectory that will change their life forever, and which is a big part of the reason we do this. We actually, pre-COVID times, back, I guess, a year ago now, we had about 1,000 kids show up to the state capitol in support of school choice. And so we've done events like that and book bag giveaways to spread the word about school choice around the state of Wisconsin. And as we do this, we're going into many communities where people would not consider themselves, quote unquote, politically conservative, but we're reaching out and sharing our ideas and showing how our policies actually do work. And also, too, we have a policy principle of getting market forces into healthcare. And I have a firm belief that, yes, everybody should have access to healthcare, but we're not going to solve that simply through a government program. What we can do is introduce things like price transparency to healthcare and allow people to make rational choices, which will help control the costs, which are spiraling out of control. But to get to your question, like, how does this fit, right? Like, so I look at society, I look at recent events, and I don't just mean the last several months or several years. I just look at the trajectory of society. And then one of the problems that we have, I think, is there is a crisis of faith in our nation. There are many people who, again, whether they're on the political left or political right, have invested too much in the idea that a government can solve X, Y, or Z problem. And I don't think that's realistic. So part of it is, again, this mission is doing what we can on earth to bring forward good ideas to people, to reach out for them in a spirit of reaching them where they're at, understanding we may not all agree on everything today, and put forward good ideas that are within our control as humans to go ahead and execute on this earth. And again, come at that from good faith and say, this is an idea that I believe personally will work, will help to solve a problem that you face in your life. And you may not, agree with me on the other 5 solutions I have, but at least maybe we can agree on this one and get this right, which will help to put our society in a better place. And some of this will be executed again through, advocating for government policy changes, and that's great. And some of it, again, will be very tactical on the ground, reaching and working with fellow Americans, like, as I mentioned, in our pro-life work. But in any case, I think the idea is control what you can here on earth. And then I'm willing to accept, and I think everybody on our team would say this too, that at the end of the day, there are certain things that we cannot control that are part of God's plan. And we're not gonna be able to predict all that and the way it's gonna go. But let's do the best we can right now to reach people and to get them moving forward on solutions that we can handle. And it's been great. We've, since we launched about a year and a half ago, we've worked with and touched and, reached many thousands of people across the state of Wisconsin. It's been a bit of a wild ride, but it's been great. And I think it's been very incredibly positive in a time in our nation's history that probably lacks a lot of positivity.
Homer?
No, that's good. That's good. A busy man, and again, you never disappoint, Tommy. You're still batting 1,000.
That's the Hall of Fame number.
Yeah, it's Kevin, and it's the Holy Spirit, and it's Homer, and it's Brent. I just come along for the ride. Before we close, with great gratitude, Kevin, for your time, for sharing your faith story. It was beautiful. Would you give us some sort of an address, email, whatever, that people are interested in what sounds like a ministry in this nonprofit that you lead with your team? How could people get involved, please? We can put it up on the screen, thanks to Brent.
Sure, absolutely. So at No Better Friend Corp, at No Better Friend CORP. If you go there on Facebook, as well on Twitter too, you can find us. And we do, I think, a pretty good job of getting the word out there in terms of like what we're doing, events, and from there you can link to our website as well too. But I would urge everyone to follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and just, again, you'll see what we have coming up. You'll see a bit of the messaging that we're sharing in terms of ideas, policies, and things that we think are important to solving problems. And I thank you for allowing us to share that.
It was a great privilege for us to hear you share your faith story. Again, just fantastic. Thank you, Kevin. If there are those of you who want to perhaps participate, share your own faith story, you know someone, please email me at pippenstom@yahoo.com, P-I-P-I-N-E-S, pippenstom@yahoo.com. This has been My Faith with Homer and Pip. Our producer is Brent Yunk. He is the straw that stirs the drink. And we thank you so much, everybody. In the midst of it all, we have a Lord who loves us, who forgives us, who is in charge. God bless you in 21 and beyond. Thanks for tuning in.